All right. Keep that right there. All good things. All right. Start this up. All right, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Thank you guys for joining. This is going to be the inaugural kickoff of one of the Insight webinars. So this webinar's theme is the road to specialty, starting from medical school all the way internship, residency, and fellowship. So again, introducing our new webinar series. So what you can expect is we're going to be doing monthly presentations by physicians and healthcare professionals at Insight, as well as guest speakers. So we're going to be talking about all sorts of things in health and wellness. The audiences are not going to be just doctors, just patients, just people in our community. It's going to be everyone. We'll have topics for patients, topic for healthcare practitioners, topic for specific subgroups of medical practices, and then the general public. If you have any questions, we have an email address listed right here. Our wonderful, incredible, inspiring corporate digital marketing creative director, Imran, has been fantastic in setting all of this up. Specific, incredible shout out to him, and we can get this started up. So I am Dr. Evan Peskin. I am a pain management, interventional pain physician at Insight. I'm licensed and boarded as an anesthesiologist and as a pain management physician. I've been in Miami, Florida for the last 15 years before joining Insight. I've also worked in the past as a private education consultant for people applying or people going through different levels of medical education. So how did this talk come up? So this was brought up to me that I felt very clear. I knew what my path was to bring me here. And 2 years ago, we were doing a treatment for a 67-year-old female with pancreatic cancer. We were doing something called celiac plexus block, and we were using medication to burn away or to affect the functioning of part of this plexus. And luckily, she did wonderful. And we're very grateful. And we were talking to one of her family members, actually her son, afterwards, and he said, I didn't even know there were pain doctors. How do I become one? And it kind of came up to me that this path that was crystal clear for me is not something that's common. So the point of this is to kind of explain how you can end up becoming or acting as a specialist in the wide world of medicine. So the intended audience for this webinar is people who are interested in completing medical subspecialty training. We're going to cover 3 things in generalities, which is the pathway for training, the options associated with specializations called fellowships, and then some discussion about should you, could you, is there a reason, why should you, etc. So what are fellowships? A fellowship is a subspecialization, clinical or research, within a field of medicine after you complete a residency program. So you can do an internal medicine residency and then do an infectious disease specialty or fellowship. You can do a surgery residency and then do an endocrine surgery fellowship. So why should you complete a fellowship? So the first thing is obviously, hopefully, knowledge is always a good thing. Further expertise, further insights, and experience is always a positive thing. If you're really focused and passionate about one specific specialty of medicine, this is how you get there. If it's not just medicine and it's not just critical care, but it's pediatric critical care, there's a walkthrough to get to be able to practice that specialty. There's a benefit to differentiating yourself in a very saturated field or highly competitive field of medicine. These specializations really can make you stand out. So some people do fellowships for increasing their earning potential, although I have to tell you that's not guaranteed. There's training cultures. So if you look at the Medical University of South Carolina, they are rightfully proud that a lot of their residents go on and match in fellowship. And then the other thing is there's a need that we're serving within our community, within the medical field as large. For example, the field of transplant is something that is rapidly growing as there's more of a need for kidney transplant, lung transplant, et cetera. And you do that by specializing. So what is the finish line of running this marathon? So if you're just at the very beginning, you apply for medical school, go through that process. So you can then apply for internship or residency, go through that process. So then you can apply for fellowship, or you can go right into the workforce. So this is some of the process is depending on the pathway you take, and not all of them are identical. There are many, many different exams, hurdles, and steps along the way. So this is some of the path that, like myself, this was my personal experience, is starting all the way from the MCAT when you were in college, going through individual shelf exams for specialties in med school, step 1, 2, and 3 during medical school in the beginning of residency, teaching you or testing you about physiology, background, anatomy, pathology of a wide variety of medical conditions. There used to be something called a step 2 CK and then CS. One was clinical knowledge and one was clinical skills. They got rid of the clinical skills. Step 1 is now just pass fail. There's a lot of involvement. There's a lot of evolution happening as well, but it's good to know that you will have to deal with testing and steps along the way, all the way to the very end. So within residency, we had in-training exams. And then when you get to fellowship for licensing and certifying to actually practice your field of medicine, there's multiple exams as well to go through. For example, in anesthesia, there's 3. There's the basic, advanced, and then applied with both a written and an oral component. All of this is overseen by this organization called ACGME. And anybody who's gone through medicine knows that name right away. It is the organization responsible for accrediting graduate medical training programs for U.S. physicians. It is a private council. It's a nonprofit, but it is a private organization that accredits these programs. So right now, there's 150,000 active residents and fellows in 12,000 programs, 60% from LCME accredited U.S. med schools, 23% from international med schools, and 17% from osteopathic med schools. So are all fellowships ACGME accredited? And the answer is no. And not all no's are equal. It might be no because the ACGME doesn't yet recognize that particular subspecialty. It could be that program is in the process of either enrolling and being recognized as an ACGME accredited fellowship, or for whatever reason, it may have lost accreditation and is trying to get it back. So example, for interventional spine fellowships, these 2 on the right from Stanford and University of Michigan are wonderful, like top tier recognized programs. They are not ACGME accredited. So don't think that doesn't mean that people who come from that background or people who complete those fellowships have any less of a training. And often for programs like this, you can still be one of the best. The matching statistics are kind of horrible. And we all hear about the statistics of how many people play high school basketball, how many people play college basketball, how many people play the feeder teams, the practice teams, and what percentage make it to the floor of the NBA. And it's a fraction of a percentage of a fraction. It's a minimal amount. So med school is not quite, NBA levels of competitiveness. It's still competitive. So in the 2021 cycle, from 53,000 applicants, 23,000 were accepted, which is around 43%. And then the next step, as you go from medical school to residency. So in 2019, around 38,000 applicants, medical school applicants, submitted a rank list for residency, and there was only 35,000 positions. So that's still a 92% match. And then you go one further into the specialization. So in like 2022, out of the 13,000 active fellowship applicants, 11,000 got positions. So it's 80%. So when you count down that from 43%, then 92% of those, and then 81% of those, it does get to be a smaller and smaller amount. So matching for PGY1, which is postgraduate year 1, otherwise known as internship. Everyone's heard the stories about intern year and Grey's Anatomy and Scrubs and the whole 9 yards. So the question is, people coming from medical schools, how many matched to that first year of residency? That's a great amount. It's 94%. Coming from osteopathic schools, it's 81%. International, it was 51%. And then Non-US citizen internationals, it was 56. So what's the match? And ask any physician this. It's fun to have your, somewhat your control of your future completely taken out of your hands, and a computer program tells you where to go. So it is a extremely proprietary computer algorithm where residency candidates, people trying to get into residency, and then programs submit their rank lists, which are then matched. You, as a resident, list a certain number of ranking of first, second, third, fourth, fifth ideal programs you would like to do residency at. The residencies interview, dozens and hundreds of medical students and say, out of all of these individuals, this is my favorite person, followed by number 2, 3, 4, 5. And a computer program calculates all of that, theoretically prioritizing the students. And on the third Friday in March, lets everyone know where they're going to go for their training and for their life. So there's more intricacy and more aspects of it that are not, something that is common knowledge. And I thought it'd just be interesting to mention. There's an aspect called the SOAP and the Scramble. So SOAP is a supplemental offer and acceptance program where essentially people applied, tried to match, and they were not matched into a program. And so from those individuals, they try to apply and get positions at programs that did not fill all of their empty spots. It's a 3-day process. There's a lot of specific rules for contact, who can reach out to who, but there's 3 individual rounds of offer, and hopefully people get matched. And if not, there's something that's called the Scramble, which is just as chaotic as it sounds, which is anybody can contact a program, any program can contact an individual, any spots that are open, anyone that hasn't matched, they'll try to go through the process. So this field has evolved. So for fellowship subspecialties and for residencies, so if you look at the graph on the left, the number of residency positions is growing at a faster rate than fellowship positions. If you look at the bar graph on the right, you can see that for individual specific kinds of residencies, there may or may not be a certain number of fellowship spots open. And for ones like radiology and internal medicine, especially internal medicine, there's a lot of subspecialization that's available. When you get farther to the right on this graph and you get into psychiatry, emergency, and physical medicine, those options and those availabilities, if you want to specialize, become more and more competitive, become less and less available. From 2000 to 2020, the amount of residency spots have gone up 75%, and fellowship spots have gone up 560. So I think that's actually meant to be reversed. I'm sorry about that. So the ones on the left, this chart on the left is subspecialties filling the majority of their fellowship positions, which is saying that people want these spots. Out of these fellowships, people who are applying to it, there's a large amount. They have more people applying than filling their spots. So there's way more candidates than there are availabilities. And especially when you look at some of these very competitive specialties like thoracic surgery, like pediatric emergency medicine, people want to do that. And it is always, always a very competitive field. It is always extremely, limited spots. It can be cutthroat. And the programs that offer these spots, they're very coveted and they get their pick of the litter of the people who are applying to it. The ones at the right are subspecialties filling less than 90%. And there's ones that are, not even half filled, like medical genetics and geriatric medicine. And it's a much more complex conversation of what is causing this. Because is it that there are just so few applicants because it's not competitive, because less people want to do it, because they're not being paid as well, because there's less of a need for it? It's a tough conversation. And unfortunately, if you look at geriatric medicine, we live in an aging population. We live in a society where the relative percentage of people over 65 continues to grow. You would think that geriatric medicine is something that should be highly sought after, and we'll discuss it in a little, but unfortunately, that's not always the case. So for fellowship subspecialties, there's options based on your training background. So it used to be that from internal medicine, for example, it used to have lower fellowship participation. People just wanted, there was a desire and people wanted to be general practitioners, primary care physicians, hospitalists in the 90s, these individuals were, the meeting of the crossroads. They had to do everything. They did cardiology, they did pulmonology, they dealt with infectious disease, they did everything. And now the pendulum tends to have swung the other way, where now internal medicine, and especially residents, want to specialize, both personally as well as there's a need for it, for pulmonology, for infectious disease, for GI doctors. So you can see here the amount of people who want to be a primary care physician for U.S. allopathic doctors. In the early 2010s, it was above 60%, and it has continuously fallen to the point where it's less than 50% and approaching 40% now. Other thing that not everyone knows is multiple disciplines can end up practicing the same specialty, same fellowship. For example, I work as a pain management physician, and my background is in anesthesia. So not everyone who practices as a pain management physician is an anesthesiologist. Out of my partners, one of them is a physical medicine and rehabilitation physician. One is an orthopedic surgeon, and they are both phenomenally good doctors. So the background as well doesn't mean, a caliber, one is better than the other. It's just in this background, in this specialization, physicians with different backgrounds can still lend their skills and still have their experiences contribute and be phenomenal specialists. So this is an extremely incomplete review of fellowships. And to be honest, I rather than go into every single field and every single specialist, I just wanted to identify some of the thought that I thought was interesting. And this is just personal bias and in my discussion. So within anesthesiology, people who have completed anesthesia residencies, each of these listed here is a different fellowship that people can go into. Clearly, I have a slight bias, and pain medicine is clearly the best fellowship to go into, and I'll just lead off with that. But there are people I trained with, and people I learned from, and people who are my mentors who are adult cardiothoracic surgeons, pediatric cardiac anesthesiologists, critical care physicians, regional anesthesiologists, OB anesthesiologists, and all of these are incredibly necessary. So people who are specialized in addiction medicine are absolutely making monumental impact in people's lives, even if they're not actively in the operating room practicing as anesthesiologists. So for example, I just want to talk even when you get into some of the subspecialties, from anesthesiology to obstetric anesthesiology. The extra training is another 12 months of obstetric anesthesiology, although during residency, you have to complete a certain number of months, amount of experience of obstetric anesthesiology, or the care of pregnant women for obstetrics. Completing a fellowship like an obstetric anesthesia fellowship offers more experience, focused experience, and you can be exposed to a lot more high risk and complicated individual cases. So for surgery, there's 14 surgical specialties recognized by the American College of Surgeons, everything from cardiothoracic surgery to neurological surgery to vascular surgery and neurology. Each of these individual surgical specialties can have their own fellowship. So if you looked, there was a specialty called cardiothoracic surgery, and within that, here are some of the fellowships that people can complete. Everything from thoracic surgery all the way to transplant fellowships and research fellowships. Research fellowships moving forward these fields of medicine are incredibly important and a wonderfully necessary part. These fellowships can become incredibly competitive and can become much more difficult to match into, again, for a variety of different reasons. So from 2009 to 2013, it used to be go into a cardiothoracic surgical fellowship, there was around 93 applicants per year, and now there's 115. During that same time frame, there used to be 110 spots, and now there's 90. The match rate has decreased from 97% to about 60%. And cardiothoracic, transplant, heart surgery, these are incredibly required things in the field of medicine. Just from like very superficial things, from personal exposure I've had within dermatology, there's individual specialties like pathology, pediatric dermatology, From emergency medicine, this is just for fun facts. There's, again, wonderful things like medical toxicology and emergency medical services. And then there is incredibly subspecialized fellowships like underseas hyperbaric medicine that you have to complete an emergency medicine residency first to complete this fellowship. So hats off to all the people who are specialized in hyperbaric medicine. So always the question that comes up if you should specialize is it worth it financially? Because residency pay for the hours you do, the work you do, is relatively a substantially lower salary, whereas when you're practicing after residency, your pay usually jumps up significantly. An extra year of fellowship means another year at a substantially lower salary, but does it pay off long term? And the answer is no. It's not guaranteed at all. So the former medical director of Ohio State University East Hospital, James Allen, talks about the general internal medicine physician makes around $248,000, whereas endocrinologists who finished internal medicine residency and then took another year of specialization, their salary goes down for another year of being extra specialized, learning more, taking another year of education, 2 years of education for some specialty fellowships. Their salary doesn't change and actually goes down. So many subspecialties only kind of really exist at these major academic centers and university settings where salaries just typically are less competitive. They're not private practice, they're academics, and the salaries kind of reflect that. But there's still benefits. You're still typically in a much more secure job. You're have increased leverage if you're looking for moving or trying to join another hospital if you're subspecialized. And if you're specialized, again, I have to tell you, lifestyle is incredibly important. Not sleeping in a hospital every night, not working 7 days a week, not being exposed to the same degree of mortality, the same degree of death, the same degree of complications is worth specialization. But at the end of the day, the real reason for going into specialty should not be a dollar amount, should not be only quality of life. It should really be you want to specialize in that field because that individual specialty is something that you're passionate about. So let's look at some real world impact of this kind of, I know it's very theoretical and it's an interesting concept, but the reality of it is kind of shocking. So let's look at endocrinologists who deal with the endocrine system, who deal with, as you can see over here to the right, specific glands, specific organ systems that have become more and more important. So if you look at endocrinologists deal with diabetes, and the incidence and frequency of patients with diabetes continues to rise in America. So right now, as I just showed you for the decreased endocrinologist salary, decreased salary with required to train more plus worse quality of life means less people are going to go into this. However, endocrinologists, because of everything I just said, which is diabetes is becoming substantially more frequent, the amount of testicular cancer, ovarian cancer, pancreatic issues, thyroid disorders typically on the rise. So supply and demand should correct this, but not if insurance, compensation, and health policies don't motivate people to go into this field. And we may be heading to a direction where, as you can see in that graph with diabetes, we may have a massive amount of patients who need to see an endocrinologist, continuously growing year after year, and a decreased number of endocrinologists year after year from training. So you do all of this training, all of this extra stuff, and then hopefully you get to practice. When you're entering the field, things typically do not get simpler, they get more complicated. And if you're really lucky, you have somebody like Robin Cole, which we have at Insight in your medical staff office, who keeps the tape together, keeps us from all falling apart. So in order to be accredited by Joint Commission or the Center for Medicare Studies, you have to provide all of this information on the bottom upon request. Everything from any physician's ACLS, BLS licensing, your diplomas, your board certification, your state licensing, full application signed, explanation for any gap more than 6 months, clinical activity, case log, professional references. It's not simple. So going through all this specialization, going all through this to practice, things don't get simpler once you actually hit the real world. So I can only ever speak from my own experience, which is this was a 14-year road to get to where I am today, which is 4 years of undergraduate, 4 years of medical school, and then business school, and then a surgical internship, and then an anesthesia residency, and then a pain fellowship. And I have to tell you, after this 14-year marathon, I would do it again. From that case from the very beginning, being able to help a wonderful, wonderful lady who was experiencing monumental pain at the end of her life because of a pancreatic cancer, to give her quality of life, to help treat her pain, I would run this 14-year marathon again. So the last kind of comment that I wanted to leave with, which is I've kind of shown in this talk that going into specialization can be complicated, confusing, competitive, unclear, not always financially beneficial, can be increased training. The most important thing is the passion for the individual specialty. I am incredibly grateful for every single specialist out there who does the extra training, who goes the extra mile, who takes the extra years and can contribute and help patients in a way that they may not have to be otherwise. My mentor going through training, my mentors, Dr. Giancarelli, Dr. Saab, Dr. Dion, not only are anesthesiologists and not only are pediatric anesthesiologists, but they're pediatric cardiac anesthesiologists dealing with the anesthesia for 2-day-olds or 3-day-olds who have heart deformities. And I can tell you it made an incredible impact on me watching families speak to them, grateful that these kind, effusively brilliant people did this extra training to be there in that situation that no one wants to be in. And it definitely made an impact on me. So I know this was kind of a long-winded webinar. I know this is a very narrow focus. I hope there's someone out there who is considering specializing and wondering if it's worth it. And I just want to express that from a personal opinion, it definitely is. And we all get to make a wonderful change and changes people's insight and impact into the world. So thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it. If there's any questions, I'd be very happy to answer it. If not, we can just kind of wrap and bring it together. Thank you again for Imran for coordinating this and making sure everyone was able to see the webinar. And if there's any questions, you can always reach out to us either directly at Insights or through our social medias, through a variety of different contact mechanisms. Thank you again for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great Wednesday. Thank you again.